before Globalisation, The Forgotten History of the Muslim Trader, in London on the 7th of May 2008.
Wander around just to give the cameraman a thing or two to do. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. I've been considering some of the larger features of the architecture of the seerah recently. I find that there's, and I think most Muslims experience this when they open its pages, an extraordinary immediacy to the story that it tells. Some stories, of course, classic stories, are timeless. People are still enthralled by Homer and by Shakespeare, by the great Norse legends. There's something different when we look at the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, as well as being a great yarn. It seems to leap out of the pages at us with an alarming immediacy. And sometimes when I get a moment or two to think, I try to work out what it is that makes that story so immediate. And in the context of this meeting, one might invoke most obviously something that's very obviously there, hardwired into the logic boards of the prophetic drama, but which we tend not to think about very much, which is that we take the story to be a cosmic struggle between the principle of the one, La ilaha illallah, and the superstitious many of the Arabs. We take it to be a heroic story whereby selfishness in terms of local tribal vendettas, which had been plaguing Arabia for thousands of years, are replaced by the principle of a single law applicable to everybody. We tend to think of it in those terms, in terms of tawheed and in terms of sharia. But there's another dimension that clearly was immensely important to many of the protagonists themselves, which is an economic dimension to the seerah. When you consider the divine wisdom in sending the seal of the messengers sallallahu alayhi wasallam to that then and there, you recognize first of all the magnitude of the divine estimation of the man sallallahu alayhi wasallam, because he really was up against it, sent to a people ma undira aba'uhum, whose forefathers had not been warned, taking them from one end of the religious spectrum, polytheism, to the other end, pure monotheism, taking them from lawlessness to strict lawfulness, taking them from a belief in nothing in particular to a belief in life after death. So many extraordinary challenges that he met and successfully faced. But one of them that we tend not to focus on is the fact that the divine wisdom sent him to a community that was mercantile. We think of the 7th century Arabs as wandering Bedouin, hanging around in the desert, telling stories around the campfire and not caring too much about higher things. But the reality of the seerah is that it's essentially an urban story, and it's a tale of two cities, and the hijrah is from the city of a mercantile, plutocratic, immoral elite to a new space that is to become a zone that is for the muhajirin and for the masakin and for the poor and the mustad'afin. We tend to ignore this as Muslims frequently, that the reason for the struggle is for the mustad'afin. Not for waving a particular flag, but for the mustad'afin, for those who are made weak. So he is sent, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, to I can't really use the word capitalist so long ago, but to a strongly mercantile, selfish, detribalizing community, the Quraysh. That is where the divine wisdom has chosen to place this final jewel-like soul. And we find that this is a community where tribal ties are breaking down. Religion is not really taken seriously by too many people. It's kind of like modern Western religion. It's a civic religion. You have your own faith community and your own little festivals and your own funny little superstitious stories, but in the public space, what counts is money and certain types of civic relationships. The religious thing is kind of, your tribe does this, and your tribe has another deity. We don't care too much whether you're worshipping Al-Uzza, or Manat, or Hubal. That's not really the public concern. What really is the center of the city of Makkah, and what people really worry about, is the economic reality. If you threaten that, then you're really a troublemaker. Mecca before Islam is the city where Umayyah bin Khalaf can walk past the Kaaba with his entourage of feudal servants and slaves, and there be no legal contract at all between them. The Prophet ﷺ is sent to that people, and it's no coincidence that his message begins amongst the victims of that unjust economic order. Who are the victims? The women and the slaves are the ones who are being trampled upon. They're at the bottom of the heap, and they're the ones who first start to respond. And that is axiomatic in prophetic religion. That's where the truth tends to spread. Not with the rich and the powerful and the prestigious and the famous, but amongst the broken-hearted. The munkasiratul qulub, those whose hearts are broken by the weight that is pressed upon them by people whose main concerns are turning an extra dollar. And that's why sometimes in the West, in America for instance, sometimes you hear Arab expatriate communities saying, why don't more white people become Muslim? Because they see all these black people and Hispanics coming into the mosque and they get kind of anxious. They'd really like to see more sort of people like me in the mosque. When you ask them why, they don't have a terribly good way of expressing what's actually in their hearts. There are issues of race there, there are issues of self-esteem, there are some not very nice attitudes that bring that about. But the reality is, if you look at the seerah and you look at prophetic religion and you look at the nature of divine providence down the ages, that's where the spiritual wealth is distributed. In an unjust, cruel, materialistic, competitive, computer-obsessed society, it's amongst those people that you will find the soft hearts that will respond to the truth. The African Americans, the Hispanic Muslims. In Australia, there are more Aboriginal converts to Islam than there are white converts to Islam, despite the demographic disparities. In Latin America, it's in the favelas that the religion prospers. That's the reality of Tawheed. Those are the people to whom it appeals primarily, even though, of course, its destiny ultimately is universal. And sometimes those Arab expatriate communities driving their Mercedes and living in their exurbs and really hoping that people assume that they're white, don't really like to be told that. Often Muslims are just as uncomfortable to be told what the seerah is really about as non-Muslims, because it isn't about middle-class complacency. It doesn't say you can't have a car and you can't have a decent income and you can't succeed. It's not a monastic, ascetical tradition that turns its back on the world. But it does say very sternly that it's with the people whose hearts are broken that Allah is with. أَنَا عِنْدَ الْمُنْكَسِرَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ. I am with the broken-hearted, as he says, subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the Hadith Qudsi. That's where you expect truth to exist. And in this country, that is what a lot of people can't understand. They can't get that some middle-class guy in a big cathedral who goes to church once a year on Easter Day might actually not be what God is interested in. And that God actually is interested in precisely the people whom the establishment ethos and all of the media are least respectful of, which is the toothless old Bangladeshis in the mosque in Brick Lane, which is really where the deep process of spiritual self-naughting and the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking place. That's the radicalism of the prophetic vision. It doesn't say revolution. It does say revolutionize the way in which you categorize people. The luminous heart is much more likely to be the old Bangladeshi housewife in the tenement building than the stockbroker who's driving his BMW, who goes sometimes